How Qantas became the Australian flag carrier. Founded in 1920, Qantas is one of the oldest airlines in the world. The red kangaroo on the tail and the cheery hello when you step aboard at Heathrow can lift the mood of even the most jaded Aussie. Like Pan Am, Singapore Airlines and British Airways, the airline is a symbol of its home nation, the national flag carrier. So how did Qantas become the Australian flag carrier? There's a pretty prosaic answer to that. It was nationalised by the Curtin Labour government in 1947 and remained so until 1995 when it was privatised. Most Australians have always had a financial interest in Qantas, whether as a taxpayer or a shareholder. But there's a more interesting backstory to why Qantas is a part of Australia's psyche. The airline was founded in outback Queensland in the wake of World War I. At the time, aviation was in its infancy, but Australians are never shy about jumping on board a trend. Early aviation pioneers like Lawrence Hargrave and Charles Kingsford Smith were making significant contributions to the field from down under. The distances are vast in outback Queensland, and the roads were, and still can be, dusty and frequently impassable. Back in 1920, it would take days to get between isolated towns. A couple of blokes, namely Paul McGuinness and Hudson Fish, thought it would be a good idea to start an air taxi and charter service out of Winton, Queensland. Possibly the bright idea came about after a Sunday afternoon sinking a few too many drinks. They called the airline the Queensland and Northern Territory Aerial Service, or Qantas. If you're at all familiar with Winton, Queensland, even now, it's not really the place to inspire confidence in a business venture. But aviation was a novelty, and they got some passengers. Then they got a mail run. In 1922, they began their first scheduled passenger service between Cloncurry and Charleville, both railhead towns, and you can still take 20-odd hours to chog between Charleville and Brisbane on the Westlander, should you so desire. From these very humble and dusty origins, Qantas grew into what it is today. This early Qantas backstory perfectly suits Australia's taste for adventurous and dusty national myth-making. They're rather good at it. And that was 100 years ago. Credit to Qantas for surviving and prospering and taking the company from that dusty outback airstrip to airports around the world. Australians are now a well-travelled bunch. You'll find them in London tube stations, and they seem to have taken over every second coffee bar in New York. But to get out of Australia, you've got to fly. And for a long time, there was a significant cultural imperative to do a big trip overseas before getting married and settling down. Travelling is in the national DNA. Qantas played a big part in that process. They were the airline to do your first overseas flight on. The airline facilitated adventure, and people of a certain age have long associated Qantas with their first big trip. Qantas has succeeded as a national flag carrier not only because of ownership, but because Australians have willingly adopted it into their national consciousness for a century, and Qantas has astutely utilised this.